Well, to discuss this story a little more, I'm joined in the studio by the news analyst and political campaigner Vava Tampa. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The impression we had was that Boko Haram was on the losing end of this fight with the Nigerian government and other regional forces, and that it had suffered a string of defeats. But that table seems to be turning.
Well, they have indeed suffered a lot of defeat, and they are, if the momentum continue, are in the losing end. But there is a serious issue here. The serious issue is, to win such a battle, you need to win the hearts and the minds of the local. Because Boko Haram are not a traditional fighting force. They don't wear military fatigue the way the Nigerian army do. So they are a guerrilla militia gangs in many with an Islamic mindset. So to win a battle, you really need to have the local on your side. And Boko Haram, given what the government in Nigeria and many other parts of that part of the world has been doing, seem to be winning the hearts and minds of the locals.
I suppose the problem is that Boko Haram, as you sort of touched on there, is broken up into different cells.
Yeah.
And so if you attack perhaps the main artery, you've got other sort of veins running around in different parts of the country. So for a defeat to be successful, as you said, you've got to work on the hearts and minds of people, but at the same time, you've got to have a multi-pronged approach to the actual fight with this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the biggest problem before was Boko Haram was being attacked simply from Nigeria. Now we have Boko Haram being attacked from different parts of the West Africa, in Niger, in Chad, and so forth. So that seems to be working. But the one element, the one part which the traditional army of Nigeria, Niger, and Chad have not done, and where they are losing, is in winning the heart and the minds of the people. And some of the actions, some of the policies they have adopted seem to be actually defeating the very objective they're trying to achieve.
Well, I haven't heard President Buhari, although he talked about a sort of Marshall Plan, but he hasn't really talked a lot about this winning of hearts and minds. I mean, the focus appears to have been, you know, he's a military man, go in there and sort of, you know, knock the brains out of Boko Haram. But also the other worrying aspect is what we're seeing about these young female suicide bombers. I mean, a 12-year-old girl, for crying out loud.
Well, there is a serious issue, and that issue is the reason Boko Haram similar militia gangs exist, because there is a vacuum of power from the central government, where the central government is in delivering some of the basic needs. Then clearly, when there is ignorance, and you have someone who gives you a bread and so forth, and then tells you some lie, you're more prone to believe. And that's one of the reasons we have younger people committing suicide bombing in Nigeria and many other parts of the world.
But I think perhaps that the more worrying thing is that, because what we heard the last time was that some of their parents were actually sending them out, that some of these kids may not actually be aware of the, you know, what they're actually going to do properly. And of course, then we're hearing that in Cameroon, more than 80 children have been detained for several months, and these are children.
And that's a tragedy.
Yeah, on suspicion of collaborating with. But I mean, when you hear things like a 12-year-old, you know, detonating a bomb, then you can perhaps see that, you know, I mean, what are you going to do under those circumstances?
The problem is, I mean, the parents send some of those kids. Partially, we do not know the actual fact, which is some of the parents may be actually under threat. If you do not send your kids, will come after you. Those are some of the reality those parents faces. But also, similarly terrible is also the fact, in places like Cameroon, one of the victims is 5 years old who's being detained, 80 of them. It makes absolutely no sense. And this is an issue. This is on itself is a crisis which needs to be looked onto.
So however you look at it, in spite of all the noises made by Goodluck Jonathan and now President Buhari and all the regional people, Boko Haram are still very active in that region of West Africa and still able to organize major attacks.
Very active is a very difficult word to deal with. I mean, that part of the region of West Africa is larger than the entire Western world. So it's a massive issue. Another thing we need to take into account is the regional force which President Buhari is pushing forward hasn't yet come into existence, coming into operations. That will come into operation in the next coming weeks. So we actually have to wait. But in addition to simply attacking Boko Haram, there ought to be a program which deals with some of the humanitarian crises in a part of the world, and there ought to be a program which actually go on and win the hearts and the minds of the locals.
Yeah, in fairness to Buhari, he has talked about a Marshall Plan, but we have to watch and see how that goes. Vava Tampa, thank you very much indeed.